The air inside the small police station crackled with quiet routine phones ringing, keyboards clacking, the occasional laughter from a joke shared over stale coffee. Then, the little boy spoke. "I need to tell someone something important," he said softly, almost too softly for anyone to hear. Sheriff Daniel Carter barely glanced up from his paperwork. "Go ahead, son, we're listening." The boy didn't blink. His hands clutched a worn-out toy soldier, dirt-smudged and missing one leg. He looked no older than 7, but his eyes, they didn't belong to a child. They held a silence too deep, too old. "Daddy isn't gone," he said. "He's under the floor." The room stilled. Every sound, every clock tick, every typing finger seemed to vanish. Sheriff Carter slowly stood up. "What do you mean, under the floor?" The boy tilted his head, pointing to his left with slow certainty. "In the kitchen, under the new tiles? That's where Mommy said he went to sleep." Detective Maria Lopez dropped her pen. At first, they thought maybe it was a game. Kids made things up all the time, but the boy's tone, it didn't shift, didn't crack. There were no signs of nerves or mischief, just calm, quiet truth. The sheriff stepped around his desk and knelt to the child's level. "Can you tell me your name?" "Eli Matthews," he said. "And your dad's name?" "Benjamin Matthews." Sheriff Carter stood slowly, eyes locking with Lopez. "That name sounds familiar." Lopez's hands were already moving, typing into her system. "Benjamin Matthews, 36, reported missing 3 months ago. Construction foreman. Wife filed the report, Cynthia Matthews." Sheriff Carter grabbed his coat. "Get the team, and bring a search warrant." The house was just on the edge of town, quaint, freshly painted, with a white porch swing that squeaked when the wind touched it. Neighbors described the Matthews as quiet but kind. Cynthia always smiling, Eli always polite. No one had suspected a thing. The tiles in the kitchen were new, pristine, smooth white and blue ceramic. A job well done, almost too perfect. They moved the table, peeled back a few edges, and that's when the smell hit. The digging didn't stop for hours. When they finally reached it, the truth lay there, wrapped in plastic, beneath the concrete slab. Unmoving, undeniable. Sheriff Carter stood back, watching Eli from the doorway. The boy didn't cry. He only stared, holding that broken soldier like it was the only thing left in the world he trusted. As the ambulance lights painted the night sky red and white, Carter whispered, "Why didn't anyone listen sooner?" "Because sometimes the truth doesn't come in screams. Sometimes it comes in the quiet voice of a child who saw more than he ever should have." 3 months, that's how long Benjamin had been missing. That's how long Eli had known. And now, with his small voice and steady gaze, he had brought the truth to the surface. But this was just the beginning. What happened to Benjamin? Why had no one questioned the rushed kitchen renovation? What was Cynthia hiding, and why did Eli wait until now to speak? As the investigation deepened, Oak Ridge would unravel a story buried far deeper than just beneath a floor. And it all began with 7 words. "Daddy isn't gone. He's under the floor." Asterisk. The ambulance drove away in silence, its lights flickering against the quiet homes of Oak Ridge. The crowd that had gathered across the street, neighbors in robes, arms folded tight, slowly began to disperse. But the questions lingered in the air like smoke. Eli sat wrapped in a thick blanket on the back step of the porch. His toy soldier rested in his lap, the only thing untouched by the flashing lights or digging shovels. Detective Maria Lopez knelt beside him. "Eli," she said gently, "why did you wait until today to tell someone?" He didn't look at her. Right away, he stared out at the shadows, moving across the lawn, the breeze lifting his hair gently. "Mom said I couldn't tell," he finally whispered. "She said if I did, I'd never see Daddy again." Lopez felt her throat tighten. Behind them, Cynthia Matthews sat handcuffed in the back of a patrol car, her face pale but calm, eyes closed like she was simply waiting for all of it to end. She hadn't asked for a lawyer, she hadn't cried, and she hadn't spoken a single word. Sheriff Carter stood at the edge of the porch, his arms crossed. "You think the boy witnessed it?" Lopez looked up. "I think he saw everything. He just didn't know what to do with it." The forensics team moved carefully around the now exposed area of the kitchen floor. The body had been transported, but the hollow beneath the way it had been covered so precisely spoke of planning, not panic. There were no signs of a struggle upstairs. No neighbors had reported hearing anything. Even the dog, a small terrier named Moose, hadn't barked. It was as if the house had swallowed the truth whole. "I want to talk to Cynthia," Carter said, already stepping toward the cruiser. She didn't resist when he opened the door. Her gaze flicked briefly to his, then away again. "Why Cynthia?" he asked softly. "Why would you bury the father of your child beneath your own kitchen?" Her voice was quiet, "Because no one would believe me." He frowned. "Believe you about what?" She looked out the window, her eyes glassy. That it wasn't supposed to happen. That he just wouldn't stop. Not that night. Sheriff Carter felt the ground beneath the conversation shift. "What do you mean wouldn't stop?" But Cynthia said nothing more. She closed her eyes again. And that's when Carter noticed something strange. Her hands were shaking, but not from fear, from exhaustion, or maybe something deeper. Back, inside the house, Lopez had taken Eli to the living room. She handed him a warm mug of cocoa, which he held with both hands, though he didn't drink. His eyes scanned the room, pausing at the photographs on the wall. One caught Lopez's attention too, a smiling Robert Matthews, his arm around a much younger Eli, both wearing matching blue ball caps. He was different before, Eli murmured, eyes still on the picture. Before what? Lopez asked. Before the yelling, Eli said. Before Mommy cried in the bathroom a lot. Before the holes in the wall. Lopez's breath caught. He used to play games with me, he continued. He called me Detective Eli, but then he got loud. And sometimes scary. And your mom? She asked gently. She tried to be quiet, but she was scared too. In that moment, Lopez saw the truth take shape, not just a tragedy, but years of silence. Of fear tucked behind family photos and polite smiles. Of a little boy who loved both of his parents, even when he couldn't understand what was happening to them. Back at the station, Carter watched through the interrogation window as Cynthia sat alone. A file folder lay closed on the desk in front of him. Inside were photos, wounds not on Benjamin, but on Cynthia. Old bruises, faint scars. A hospital report from 2 years ago marked accidental fall. But now, none of it looked accidental. She never filed a report, Lopez said, appearing behind him. Too scared, Carter replied. Lopez hesitated. Do you think it was self-defense? I think she broke, Carter said. And when no one came to help, she buried it. Literally, they stood in silence for a long time. Outside, the early morning sun had begun to rise over Oak Ridge, casting long shadows down Maple Avenue. Eli was asleep on a cot in one of the quiet rooms at the station, still gripping his toy soldier. He hadn't cried, not once, but his small body curled tight like he was holding something in. The truth had come out, but justice, understanding, healing, those were still far off. And as the town began to wake, unaware of what had truly happened in the blue-shuttered home on the hill, the first headline appeared online. Boy reveals father's body hidden beneath kitchen floor, mother in custody. But no headline could capture what Eli saw, or what he would carry. This wasn't just a crime scene. This was a family that had slowly crumbled behind closed doors, and no one had seen the cracks until it was too late. 3 days after the discovery, Oak Ridge felt colder even though the summer sun was high. The whispers had already started, not just about the tragedy, about the silence, about how no one knew, about how a boy barely tall enough to reach a doorknob had uncovered what an entire town had overlooked. But something strange began to happen at the station. Eli stopped speaking. It wasn't fear. It wasn't shock. It was something else, something deeper, like he was holding back more than just grief. Lopez sat across from him in the small office they'd turned into a temporary room. She offered him toast with strawberry jam, his favorite. He took it but didn't eat. He just stared at the carpet, his toy soldier placed beside his foot, facing the wall. You don't have to be brave anymore, Eli, she said softly. You already were. You did the hard part. Still, he said nothing. She knew the signs. Sometimes, when the mind couldn't make sense of what the heart had seen, it just paused. But in Eli's silence, there was something purposeful. Like he was protecting something, or someone. Sheriff Carter, meanwhile, was growing frustrated. Cynthia had stopped talking after her quiet confession. He wouldn't stop. She'd gone completely silent. No lawyer, no cries, just stillness. I need answers, Carter said, pacing his office. I need to know exactly what happened that night. What if we're looking at it wrong? Lopez asked. Carter turned. What if the crime isn't what we found, but what led to it? Lopez placed a file in front of him. Hospital records, school reports, CPS calls that were never followed up. In each of them a small thread. Not enough to act, but enough to wonder. Years of it, Lopez said. Covered, denied, excused. Even Eli tried to pretend things were normal. Carter opened the final folder. It was the last school assignment Robert had helped Eli with. A simple drawing titled My Hero. It showed Eli holding hands with a man in uniform, smiling beneath a sun that had no color. But something about the drawing chilled Carter, because behind the smiling stick figure of the dad was a large gray shadow, and in the corner, a small stick figure with no face. Eli. I want to talk to her mother, Carter said suddenly. Cynthia's. Her name was Margaret Hill. She lived 45 minutes outside town, in a small one-story farmhouse, surrounded by dried-up rose bushes and laundry lines. She opened the door with a look that said she'd been expecting them for years. You're here about my daughter? She said. No trace of surprise in her voice. We need to understand, Lopez said. We need to know what was really happening in that house. Margaret stepped aside. Then sit. Because this story, it didn't start with Cynthia. It started long before her. For the next hour, they listened. She spoke of a quiet girl with dreams of becoming a teacher, of a young woman who fell hard for a soldier returning from war, believing love could fix anything, of a marriage that began with laughter and ended with bruises, explained away by clumsy steps and falling doors. He wasn't always cruel, Margaret said, but the war changed him, and Cynthia kept hoping he'd change back. Why didn't she'll ever report it? Carter asked. Margaret smiled sadly. Because people don't believe nice families in nice towns can have monsters in their kitchens. Outside, the wind kicked up, and a single rose petal blew against the window. Back at the station, Eli sat in the quiet, tracing something on the paper, a spiral, over and over, until finally, his small voice returned. She didn't mean to hurt him, he said. Lopez turned, heart-catching. She was scared. He pushed her. She didn't scream. She just hit him back. Lopez moved closer, and then what? Eli. He looked up at her, eyes glassy. He didn't move. And Mommy cried. For a long time, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small photo, one he hadn't shown anyone. It was of Robert, smiling, holding a baby Eli. On the back, scrawled, in crooked handwriting, "Forgive me if I can't always be the man you need." Lopez took a slow breath. This wasn't just a boy telling a story. This was a child holding the pieces of a broken family in his hands, trying to make sense of them all. But the most painful part? He still loved them both. Now the case wasn't about guilt or innocence. It was about truth, about healing, about the echoes of pain passed down through generations, hidden beneath smiles, beneath floors, until a little boy said, "He's not dead, he's under there," and the world had to stop and listen. The courtroom doors swung open, and every head turned as Eli entered. Holding Lopez's hand, he wasn't trembling. He wasn't confused. He walked like he'd already carried 1,000-pound truth on his shoulders and survived it. Cynthia looked up from the defense table, her eyes instantly finding her son. They widened, but not in fear, in something raw, something closer to shame and awe. She hadn't expected to see him here, especially not today. But Eli had asked to come. He had looked Lopez in the eye that morning and said, "They're telling a story, but it's not the right one." Inside, the trial was already electric. Prosecutors had painted Robert as a decorated Marine, a local hero. They showed photos of his medals, his community service, the Little League team he coached. They spoke of a tragic misunderstanding, of a woman who snapped, but the defense hadn't painted Cynthia as a victim either. They'd painted her as a ghost, someone who disappeared long before Robert ever did. She was present, but she wasn't living, her attorney had said in opening statements, because she was surviving, and surviving doesn't always look heroic. Lopez knew what came next. They would try to make the jury believe it was an accident, that Cynthia struck him in self-defense, maybe even instinctively, that she panicked and buried him because she had no one else to call. But it would all be speculation until now. Judge Holloway looked over his glasses when he saw the boy. "Detective Lopez," he said gently, "is this really necessary?" Eli didn't wait to be called. He stepped forward and said, "I want to talk." A quiet gasp rippled across the courtroom. Judge Holloway looked at him. "You understand where you are, son?" Eli nodded. "Yes, sir. And you know you don't have to speak." "I know," Eli said, "but I want to." The judge glanced at both legal teams. The room held its breath. Then he nodded. Eli was sworn in. A wooden stool was pulled to the stand. He climbed up and sat down, and then, in the clearest, most unwavering voice of the entire trial, he began. "Daddy wasn't always bad," he said. "He used to call me Captain Eli. He made my lunches. He helped with school. We played detective games." Someone in the jury box wiped their eyes, but then something changed. He got heavy in his voice, in his face. He yelled a lot. "At Mommy? At me? Sometimes at nothing." The attorney asked, "Did he ever hurt you?" Eli hesitated, not like punches, but sometimes he grabbed hard, and sometimes I saw Mommy cover her arms, even when it wasn't cold. And the night it happened, Eli's fingers tightened around his knees. There was a crash. I ran out of my room. Mommy was on the floor. Daddy was standing over her. I said, "Stop." He looked at me. And then, he didn't move anymore. Gasps echoed. Mommy cried and hugged him and said, "Please wake up," but he didn't. The attorney was silent for a long moment. "And what did your mom do after that?" "She rocked him," Eli whispered, "and then she got quiet. Like real quiet. And the next day she started tiling the floor." "Did she tell you what to say?" "No," he said. "She just said, some things we don't tell anyone, but I knew I had to, because he wasn't dead to her." She still talked to him sometimes. Even after, it wasn't just a boy's testimony, it was a window into the parts of a house no one ever visited, into the echoes of fights heard but not remembered, into a woman who had tried to build a home over a grave of pain, both real and emotional. When Eli stepped down, the courtroom wasn't the same. Even Judge Holloway looked changed, like a crack had opened in the script. They'd all expected to follow because now, the story wasn't about what happened on one night, it was about what happened slowly, over years. Until silence became survival, until a little boy said the one thing everyone else had been afraid to, "Dad isn't dead. He's under the floor." And the world listened. The news spread before the verdict did not through papers or headlines, but through whispers, glances, and sudden hushes in grocery store aisles. People didn't just talk about the trial anymore. They talked about the boy, about the way he stood in court like an old soul inside a child's body, and how his words had cracked something open inside them. Not everyone understood it, but no one forgot it. And at home, Cynthia sat alone in a holding room, waiting. She hadn't touched a cup of tea. She hadn't looked at the clock. She just sat there, staring at her own hands, like they were strangers. The door opened, and Lopez stepped in. I didn't think they'd let you come, Cynthia murmured. I asked. Lopez replied, shutting the door softly. He wanted me to tell you something. Cynthia's fingers twitched. He said, tell Mommy I still have the hat Daddy gave me, and I'm still a detective. Tears welled, but she blinked them away fast. He shouldn't still love me. Lopez sat across from her. But he does. That's what love looks like sometimes. Torn and bruised, but still there. Silence. Settled. Then, Lopez leaned forward. Cynthia, we both know that what happened wasn't just about one night. You weren't just scared, you were stuck, buried. Cynthia laughed dryly. Fitting? I buried him, too. But you didn't bury the truth, Lopez said. Your son brought it out, piece by piece. The way Robert used to hide clues, and Eli found every one. Cynthia finally looked up, her voice hollow. Am I a monster? No, Lopez said gently. You were trapped in a home where the pain was silent and constant. You weren't trying to hide a crime, you were trying to protect a life that stopped being yours a long time ago. Outside, thunder rolled low over Oak Ridge. Rain tapped softly against the glass. The jury was backed out in the courthouse. Sheriff Carter stood by Eli's side. The courtroom buzzed until the bailiff raised his voice. All rise. Cynthia was led in, her steps heavier now. The foreman stood in the case of the state versus Cynthia Hill. A pause. We find the defendant guilty of involuntary manslaughter, with recommendation for leniency based on extenuating circumstances. There was no cheer, no sigh, just quiet. Cynthia closed her eyes. But then she turned, and Eli was watching her. Their eyes met, and he smiled. It wasn't wide, it wasn't loud, but it was real, and it broke her, because she hadn't seen that smile in so long. Not since before everything broke, and she started pretending she was fine. Later, when the courthouse had emptied, Lopez found Eli sitting on the bench outside, watching raindrops dance on the concrete. She'll be okay, won't she? He asked quietly. Lopez nodded. She's going to get help now, real help, and maybe you both will heal. He tilted his head. Will I forget? Him no, she said, but you'll remember differently. Not just the shouting, maybe the good stuff too. You get to decide. He thought for a moment. He gave me the hat, he whispered, tracing the brim of the detective cap now resting in his lap. But Mommy gave me the strength to use it. Lopez blinked fast. Can I still be a detective? You already are. And as the storm passed, and the clouds began to part, Oak Ridge felt different, not fixed, but awakened. Like a wound that had finally been touched, gently enough to begin healing. It started with a little boy's words. Dad isn't dead, he's under the floor, but it ended with something more powerful. The truth rising where it had once been buried. 6 years later, the tiles in that kitchen were gone. Not just physically but symbolically. The house had been sold, gutted, rebuilt. New owners lived there now, with fresh paint and laughter that echoed through the halls. But somewhere, deep in its bones, the house remembered. And so did Eli. Now 13, he stood at the edge of Maple Lane, watching the porch swing creak gently in the breeze. He didn't cry. He hadn't for a long time. But there was something in his chest that pulsed like the memory of an old scar you still feel when it rains. A woman stepped up beside him. Detective Lopez retired now, hair streaked with silver, but eyes just as sharp. You okay? She asked softly. He nodded. I just wanted to see it one more time. You sure you're ready? I think I was born ready, he said with a small smile. He had grown taller, shoulders broader. But it was the way he carried silence that had changed most. No longer a silence born from fear or confusion, but from knowing. From having faced the dark and come out the other side still whole. Lopez handed him the envelope. Inside was the letter. His mother had written it a year into her sentence, a facility, not a prison. Therapy, counseling, and most of all, time. Time to remember who she was before everything got lost. She'd mailed it to Lopez, not sure when Eli would be ready. He opened it now. My sweet boy, if you're reading this, then I know you're strong enough to hear everything. I never wanted you to carry what I buried, but you were braver than all of us. And because of you, I learned what survival really means. Not hiding, not silence, but truth. You saved me. I hope I can spend the rest of my life earning that. Love, always, Mom. He folded the letter carefully and tucked it inside his jacket. Then he turned toward the community center, once a vacant warehouse. Now a place Eli helped build with a group of volunteers. He ran a weekly group there for kids who had seen too much, too young. Not because he was an expert, but because he remembered. Inside, a circle of chairs waited. One kid, maybe 9, sat with arms crossed, distrust on his face. Another girl doodled nervously in her notebook. Eli sat down, pulling out a familiar object from his Bogado toy magnifying glass. The same one his father once gave him, worn but still intact. All right, detectives, he said gently. Today we talk about what we've noticed, what we've heard, what people don't always say out loud but we feel anyway. The kids looked up. And slowly, the space began to soften, somewhere between pain and purpose. Eli had found something most people spent a lifetime chasing: clarity. His story wasn't just about grief. It was about what you do with it. He hadn't just uncovered what was under the floor. He had built something above it, something strong, something that helped others rise, and in that room, filled with voices that had once been afraid to speak, the real foundation was being laid not of concrete or tiles, but of hope, of healing, of truth that no longer needed to be buried.